Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. This is going to be a video where I will discuss segmentation, targeting, and positioning in, of course, the wider context of marketing. So let's talk about the importance of market segmentation. So understanding market segments helps firms in really, other ways too, right? But three major ways. So one, defines the needs and wants of customers. Two, design specific marketing strategies because they're obviously going to be different for different segments. And then three, decide how to allocate the marketing resources. Obviously, every company has, finite resources, so they have to figure out how best to allocate those resources. So, what are some criteria for effective market segmentation? So, obviously, substantial. It's got to be large enough for the firm to make a profit. So, that market segment's got to be large enough in order for the firm to be profitable within that segment. Excuse me, measurable. The size and purchasing power, again, of that market segment has to be clearly identified, at least to the extent that that's possible. Differentiable, i.e., must be able to be differentiated. So that market segment must be able to be differentiated from other market segments, right? It's got to be accessible. It must be able to reach and serve the segment. So if the segment is in a far-flung part of the world and it's very difficult to get stuff to it, get stuff in and out, then it may not be feasible. And it must also be actionable. So it must be able to develop strategies that attract certain segments. So let's talk about segmentation basis. So there's different ways that we can segment a market, right? So a very obvious one, very common one, indeed a very common one is demographic segmentation. So we could segment by age, seniors, midlife. We could look at teens. We could look at preteens, families, so on and so forth. We could look at gender. We could look at income. We could look at marital status and indeed family size. So I just discussed demographic. If we look at, say, geographic, again, we could look at nations, international, we could look at regions like, East Coast of the US, West Coast of the US. States or neighborhoods would also fall under geographic. If we were looking at psychographic, we could look at psychological traits. We could look at what motivates people. Um, think about Hertzberg's theory of motivation and then consumer attitudes. We could also, if we were looking at it from maybe, if we're looking at segmenting from a behavioral standpoint, we could look at things like loyalty, how often do they use the stuff, how sensitive are they to price, and then, what are the occasions when they would be wanting to purchase. So again, geographic segmentation, as I just said, we'd certainly look at the market size, customer convenience. And notice they put Cracker Barrel. If you ever notice that Cracker Barrel is almost always off the highway. They're almost always right off the highway, and that's deliberate, right? Because they want to target people that are taking trips. They don't want to worry about packing food. They can get some, kind of down home country cooking, if you will, some good old country food, and it's right off the highway, so they can just get off, eat, and get right back on the highway. So it's very convenient, right? Population shift. So the reasons for this could include economic conditions, people moving around for jobs, people are retiring, maybe natural disasters that force people to move from, one area or locale to a different one. So psychographic segmentation. So think of this as we're dividing people based on opinions, interests, and activities. So what we call the vowels network. I don't really get into what that is here, which kind of beyond the scope of this class, but we just know that it identifies three motivations. So ideals, achievement, and self-expression. So again, these are ways that we can psychographically segment and market if we so choose. We may also look at the availability of resources and how that affects each group's ability to act on primary motivation. We could look at behavioral segmentation. So variables could include the occasions, how loyal, loyalty, the usage rate, how often they use it. Yeah, the 80-20 rule, that's pretty common in marketing. 20% of heavy users account for 80% of the total demand for a product. And that's probably true across most products. So often the most difficult of the four bases to use, and simply because when we're dealing with behavioral, we're getting very subjective. So marketing research is of course expensive, and it can also be extremely time consuming. If we look at international market segmentation, we could think about global segmentation. We could, split the world up. I mean, it's like, how do you want to, break it up, right? How do you want to slice and dice it? Do you want to go continents? Do you want to go regions of the world? Do you want to go countries? you want to go regions within those countries? It's sort of like how far do you want to drill down? And some of that's going to be dependent on or driven by it's going to be driven by how big is that market segment, right? So international market segments and the marketing mix. We could deal with standardizing or localizing elements of the market mix. So, for example, McDonald's may have a pretty standard menu, but if you go to McDonald's in India, where the religion is predominantly Hindu, then you're not going to find beef, for example, right? They're going to have other things instead. So that would be an example of how they've localized the mix. And there may also be variances in advertising regulations and preferences. Advertising regulations could, it's sort of different countries have different rules on to try to protect their citizenry as they should. Um, certain times a day, certain adverts can be shown. But, there used to be what's called the watershed. Sort of after that, you could show more like adult themed advertising, if you will. So, factors in selecting target markets. So, what are some things to consider while targeting? Well, obviously, one probably goes without saying, pretty obvious, the growth potential, right? If there's no growth potential, then why would we do that, right? So, we're looking for at least some growth potential. The level of competition, and how good of a fit strategically is this target market going to be? Again, relative to what we would be aiming at that target market. We may also want to look at target marketing analytics, which we can get detailed data of the target market. A good way to do that. I mean, there's obviously a ton. There's a plethora of other ones too, but Google Analytics is actually pretty good for stuff like that. It's kind of a free or a low cost way to get some marketing analytics and help you make some data driven and informed decisions. So three base strategies. So we have what we call undifferentiated targeting, where the major advantage is potential savings. So basically everybody's being targeted in the same kind of way. So obviously that's cheaper, hence the potential savings. Now the differentiated targeting is kind of the opposite of that, right? So firms can provide increased levels of satisfaction and they can also generate more sales. So a good example would be GM, right? So you could go from Chevrolet to Buick to Cadillac. Obviously they're all owned by General Motors. And then we could also delve into the world of niche marketing. And this is for those who have specialized needs and will pay higher prices to meet those needs. So perhaps things like, luxury cars, luxury jewelry could be examples of this niche marketing, if you will. Obviously, bearing in mind there that those segments are likely going to be pretty small. And then market positioning. So what are some steps in market positioning? So step one, obviously, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to analyze your competitors' positions, excuse me. So you might want to use a perceptual map. You don't have to, but you kind of want to get an idea. Okay, like this is where all our competitors are. Where do we fall into this sort of continuum, if you will? Step two is clearly define your competitive advantage. So we could look at things like price quality relationships. We could look at other attributes. We could look at how we're going to apply those attributes. Because if we're not going in there with a defined competitive advantage, and bear in mind, part of a competitive advantage is that you can sustain it. If we're not going in there with that sort of clear goal and clear vision, then it's likely not going to work. And step three is evaluate feedback. So, for example, a good example of that Disney's the Mickey check seal of approval, and then a positioning statement. So the positioning statement, and these are important. Clearly reflect the steps of the positioning process, including competitive advantages of the product. And again, you notice that they're talking about competitive advantages again. That's important because again, the competitive advantage is really, kind of the tip of the spear, if you will, right? It's the tip of that spear in the sense that it should be driving everything else. Because if you don't succeed in, gaining and holding a competitive advantage, then the odds are you worst case scenario, you're going to fail, and best case scenario, you're not going to be as successful as you otherwise could have been. Now, repositioning, this is a change in one or more of the marketing mix elements. So we may want to, like, for example, reposition the competition. This is very common in political marketing. So, depending on how, what a politician's running on or who they're trying to get them, get to vote for them, then, they'll run on different things, right? So if 4 years ago this stance was very popular and now it's not, then obviously the politician is not going to go with that anymore. They're going to find something else, right? So they kind of reposition their, I'll say their candidacy, but they kind of reposition their platform to always try to be attractive to the people that they need to vote for them to get them in. All right, short and sweet. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in a future video. Take care.